All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to, what day is today? Wednesday?
Wednesday.
Hey, it's Wednesday. Welcome to Wednesday, everyone. Dunya, is that you over there?
Yeah.
I can barely see you. Okay, that's because I don't have my glasses on. It's not. So let's say good morning. We've got Jesse here, so good morning to you, Jesse. Good evening, I guess. And same thing for Kayla. Hello, Kayla. Nice to see you here. Let's jump into where we were yesterday. We were going to finish off Mean Girls today. We've kind of answered all of these questions, right? I think we've kind of been through them all. So now I think we just need to watch through to the end, right? Anybody want to ask any questions or say anything about the film at this point before we finish watching? No? Okay. Then that's what we'll do. So online people, I'm just going to check where we are. I think we're at an hour, right? Eunice, that's where we were yesterday. We were at an hour?
An hour something.
Are we
But
further?
I really don't mind if we watch it over, right?
Well,
It's a fun movie anyway.
I'm sure you don't, but
Oh, it ended at where KD she opened the gift from Janice.
Right.
The portrait of the Janice, Damien, and KD.
Right.
That one.
Right. So that's okay. So this is where we are right now. So we're at 1 hour, 1 minute, and 52 seconds. Okay. So I think what we'll do, online people, is we will watch it through to the end. Then we will have a break. Then we'll debrief, and then I think I'll review what we need to kind of remember from this film, and then we'll go on to oppression and power. Coolio? Everyone good? Okay. That's what we'll do. So online people, I'll cut you loose to go to watch the rest of the film. Again, we're going to start at 1 hour and 1 minute, and we'll see you all at the end of the movie and after the break. Okay? So. Okay, good people, we are back. Mean Girls is over, sadly, but you know, I'm happy we were able to watch it. What would you say, Unadi and Dunya? Good movie? Yeah, you hadn't seen it before? No. Yeah, it's kind of surprising because it's kind of getting old now. I think it came out in 2004. So what is that now? We're 17 years old. Is that what it is? And almost 18. And but it's not. It seems not very dated, you know. Like the fashions are a little dated, right? But it's still the movie still kind of works, right? And so, um, yeah, good movie. Good movie, Eunice. I know you've seen it before. Is that the second time, third time?
Third, fourth, I don't know.
Third or fourth? Yeah, and it's, I'll have to say that even though, it's not, the movie is not really targeted at me, right? But even I enjoy it. Like, it's a good movie. It's well done. It's well written. It's funny. And there's lots of kind of good lessons. And of course, there's lots of good social justice stuff to use as I was muted. Sorry, I was muted. I'll repeat what I said. Pardon me. Um, Takeaways from Mean Girls here. Number one, we've all been socialized, and we see that because of how unsocialized Katie starts out, right? She doesn't know any of the rules. She doesn't know how the high school works. And we see that very quickly as her first couple of days. She doesn't know where to sit. She doesn't know people's reputation. She doesn't realize that she can't trust everybody, right? She's kind of very naive and she thinks, everyone is there, everyone there is going to be nice to her, and she very quickly finds out that not everyone is going to. And so, again, we've all been socialized, and we see that when we see someone who isn't, right? We see it when we see someone who doesn't know all the things that we know, right? Again, we're often socialized without our knowledge or consent, right? So sometimes we learn society's values and beliefs and norms. And again, sometimes people tell us directly, right? Sometimes we're clearly taught what to do and what to say and what to believe and what's good and bad. But sometimes we just kind of absorb it, right? And lots of the way we behave in regular society is just because we've observed other people and we kind of imitate them, right? We do what everyone else is doing, right? And again, nobody really teaches us to do it. We just kind of go along with what everyone else does, right? And so sometimes we wind up absorbing things without really knowing. And the things that we absorb, the ideas and the beliefs, can influence our behavior, right? The things that we think are true, and that was the critical thinking thing that we talked about, the things that we think are true will influence the choices we make and how we live our lives, right? So that's why the critical thinking thing becomes important, because sometimes we absorb things without really thinking about why, right? We kind of start believing things because we assume they're true or because everybody else seems to think they're true, but we haven't really thought about them ourselves, right? And my partner does this to me all the time where, I'm doing something and she's like, well, why do you do it that way? Or why did you choose to do that? And unfortunately, often I have to say, I don't know, it's just the way I do it. There's no reasoning behind it. I haven't thought it through. It's just like, yeah, I do it this way and this is what I'm doing, right? And you don't really consider how you came to decide that you were going to do this thing. And so that kind of happens to Katie in this movie because, again, she is socialized by Regina, right? At first, just because she's hanging out around her, but later, even though she's trying to destroy her, she's still socialized by her because Regina is kind of she's got a lot of status, she's got a lot of social power, and she's very psychologically manipulative, right? She knows how to get people to do what she wants or to feel the way she wants them to feel. And it works on just about everybody, right? It works on Gretchen, right? She's able to manipulate Gretchen. She's able to manipulate Katie. I don't know if it works on Karen. Karen's kind of Karen's sweet but kind of dumb. So I don't know if the manipulation really works on her or not, but for whatever, Karen aside, it definitely works on other people, right? And again, because of that, Katie is influenced by Regina, right? And again, this happens to all of us. We're all kind of influenced by people, and we're influenced by people, and we're influenced by things around us, right? By media, right? By society, by things that we see. And so, again, it's useful for us to try to pay attention to what are we actually learning, right? What kind of ideas are we actually absorbing, right? And should we believe those things? We'll get to that later. Harry, you just said Mean Girls is a pretty good case study. In what way? What's it a good case study of? Yeah, the third one here. Many social rules are arbitrary. What does arbitrary mean? What does arbitrary mean? Yeah, you can Google it if you want.
Oh.
I'd be curious to see what Google means, or what Google says. Zartouch says self-made, which is probably not bad. It's probably in the ballpark. What's it say there, people?
Based on random choice or personal will rather than any reason or system.
Based on random choice. Yeah. Based on random choice or personal whim, kind of made up without any real rationale or thought behind it, right? And so many of our social rules are kind of like that, right? Why do we shake hands when we meet someone? Before COVID, anyway. Why do we do that? Well, that's just because that's just what you do, right? Why do we stand a certain distance away from people when we talk? Well, that's just how it is, right? Why do the plastics wear pink on Wednesday? They just do, right?
It's a rule that everyone just kind of agrees to, I guess. It just follows along.
Yeah, right. And it's one of those. Yeah, and again, some social rules are not arbitrary, right? There's good reasons why we shouldn't murder people, right? That's not an arbitrary social rule. That's one that has strong reasons behind it, right? There's good reasons for that rule. But wearing pink on Wednesdays, can you think of any reason why that might be important? No. They just do, right? That's just what they decided is the rule, right? And so, even though those social rules are arbitrary, there will be consequences, right? If we don't follow the rules, there will be punishments, right? And sometimes they're little tiny punishments, right? Sometimes people treat you a little differently, or maybe they, don't talk to you as much as they normally would, or they're kind of giving you the side eye or something like that. sometimes they're just little subtle punishments. Sometimes they're stronger, right? And so we see a little bit of a stronger punishment in the movie when Regina wears her sweatpants on Monday and the girls make her sit at another table, right? And again, you may disagree with me, but that's a pretty strong punishment, I think, right? To be socially excluded by the most popular group in the school in front of everyone at lunch, right? Everyone sees that you're getting kicked out of the table. Horrible, right? Especially if you're a plastic, right? If you're in the band geeks and they make a band geek go and sit at another table, probably nobody will notice, right? But everybody's watching the plastics, right? They're at the center of, I don't know if it was Arad who said it, but they're kind of at the center of the web, right? They're at the center of attention. And so for Regina, especially the leader of the group, to get kicked out in front of everyone, holy cow, that's quite a punishment, right? That's a very strong kind of way of enforcing the rules, right? So, and again, this is true of society. We all do this all the time and probably without thinking about it, right? We're all kind of, interacting with each other, and, for people who follow the rules, we're rewarding them with our time or our attention or by saying certain things to them. And people who don't follow the rules, we are kind of punishing them a little bit. We're kind of pushing them away, right? And so you may know what I'm talking about or you may not, but I kind of encourage you to think about this as you interact with other people. See if you can see it happening. See if you can see people just, kind of pushing each other one way or the other, trying to get them to follow the rules. And again, it's very subtle and it's very hard to see sometimes, but it's happening, I guarantee you. Other things we should remember, most societies have a hierarchy, okay? So there's some sort of power structure. Some people have more status or power or money. Sometimes money is power, right? And then some people have less. And we certainly see that in Mean Girls, right? We talked about all of those different groups in the school. And again, I think if I asked you to rank order them in terms of who has more power in the school, you could pretty easily do it, right? You could tell me who's on top and who's on the bottom and maybe who's in the middle, right? You could do that. And again, most societies have such a thing, and your place in that hierarchy determines how people treat you, right? And so again, I'm not saying that it should. I'm not saying that that's what we want, and I'm not saying that it always happens this way, but it does kind of matter where you are in that social hierarchy, right? Again, maybe it shouldn't, but it does. And it definitely does in the high school, right? We see people are treated differently based on where they are on that kind of social ladder, right? The plastics seem to be able to do and say whatever they want, and everyone just worships it, right? Regina George can punch some girl in the face and the girl thinks it was awesome, right? If that girl punched Regina George in the face, I doubt Regina would say the same thing, right? So again, the position in the hierarchy has something to do with how people treat other people, and it has to do with opportunities or advantages that people have, right? So the plastics have kind of opportunities and resources that other people do not, right? They're able to do things that others can't, right? And look at earlier in the movie when Regina pulled up in her fancy Audi in her car, and she says to Katie, she says, "Get in, loser, we're going shopping," right?
Yeah.
And they go shopping to all the expensive stores, right? That's not the reality for most of that school, right? Most of the school doesn't have the money to be able to do that, right? But they can, right? They have the money to partake in those kind of activities. They're the most fashionable ones in the school, but then That's a lot easier when you have lots of cash, right? Fashion can be expensive, not always, but can be. So again, those girls have different opportunities because of where they are in the social hierarchy. And again, finally, the social group that you belong to does influence how you see society, right? And so think about what that cafeteria looks like to the plastics versus what it looks like to some of the lower status groups, right? The shoot, what was I going to say here? Sometimes it happens that I have stuff on the screen and then I'm like, what was I thinking when I typed that? What did I want to express to you? And usually I remember, but sometimes I don't, right? This class is effectively 100-hour-long presentation, and sometimes I forget what I meant to say. Okay, well, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to ignore it and move on. Okay, there's more. Hang on. Right. So, again, this slide is just talking about the idea that the social groups are important, right? The ones you belong to in that high school do kind of influence the experience you have, right? Do you think it's the same if you're going to North Shore High School? Do you think it's the same thing if you're in the plastics versus if you're in the band geeks or the desperate wannabes? Do you think that's definitely different, right? So high school can be a very different experience depending on where you sit in the social order, right? And people may not understand that, right? People maybe who aren't in high school might not understand that. Teachers and principals might not understand that. But it's the same thing in society, right? We're all living in the same Vancouver here. But again, depending on the social groups you belong to, you'll have kind of a slightly different experience, right? And again, it might not be, it might be barely perceptible, right? You might barely be able to know, but again, it's different, right? So for Eunice walking down the street, Eunice is a young woman of Asian descent, Indonesian, and that's going to be a slightly different experience for her than it is for me, a white male who is somewhat older walking down the street, right? Society's going to look at you differently, right? They're going to see you differently because we belong to different social groups. And again, it's going to feel a little bit different, okay? And again, same thing in the high school. If you're walking down the hall as one of the plastics, that's a different experience than walking down the hall as one of the desperate wannabes, right? Or the girls who eat their feelings. Right? That's a different thing. Okay, I'm going to jump past that because I'm a little off track, and I'll come back to those ideas a little later. So, any last comments on Mean Girls? Is there anything we forgot to talk about, or that you would like to talk about? Something you were confused about? Something you just want to say because you want to say it?
Confusing.
What's confusing?
How on earth did she heal from being crashed by a school bus so fast?
It's true. Regina George's her healing from that injury was at lightning speed, right? And she seemed to.
Doesn't really make sense.
No, if you fracture your spine and you're in kind of a, in traction, I think you have to be pretty careful for a while, right? And I don't think you're playing lacrosse within a couple months.
Yeah.
So that's a little unrealistic, of course. Jesse says, yeah, why didn't the bus driver get fired? Yeah, well, he just about ran over those other girls at the end too, right? You gotta drive slowly. There's students walking around, especially nowadays when everybody's looking at their phone. Nobody's watching traffic, and I don't mean students, I mean like everybody. Yeah, probably should have been. I would hope he was. I would hope he was at least fired, Jesse. You can't go running over students and keep your
Parents,
job.
Venus parents would have sued.
Definitely, definitely they would have. Well, I don't know. Yeah, they probably would have.
I think back then it was a big deal to like own a sports car, Lexus sports car, and like do Prada bags. But now, if you think of it, it's not that big of a that
That's not a big deal.
like compared to like back then. I don't think it's more. Yeah.
Well, I think it depends on, I think it depends on where you are,
True.
right? Like, certainly nobody in my high school was driving an Audi or, had like fancy, like brand name handbags. Like, nobody had that. There were some kids who had more money than others, for sure, but nobody was like that. But then I'm sure that there are some schools where, yeah, kids have, well, their
Yeah.
parents have cash, and therefore kids have a lot of cash too.
They compete and flex.
They flex. Yeah, that's true. That's something that people didn't do in 2004. Nobody was really flexing.
You
But-
were in high school then?
No. Do you want me to tell you when I was in high school?
Sure. I don't know what's
You don't want to know. It's so long ago. You'll be like, oh my God, were there like dinosaurs around still?
This,
I graduated from high school in 1994.
oh.
Yeah. That's a
Yeah,
long.
I can kind of do the
You can do the math.
now.
That's a long time ago. That's a very long time ago. Again, there were dinosaurs. We had to have clubs. We had
I don't think
brought
so.
them to school in case the dinosaurs attacked us, and we had to,
I think my mom was in uni then.
yeah. Okay. Any last ideas on? Okay, let's move on. So, don't forget everything we talked about with culture and socialization. It'll still be important as we go forward, but now we'll kind of move into oppression and power. And again, this is the last little kind of mini unit before we can go in and talk about sexism and racism and all that kind of heavy stuff. But again, to talk about those things, you need a bit of background, right? If we're going to kind of understand them correctly, we need a little bit of background, and this is the last little piece. Okay, have you heard the words oppression and power before? I'm sure. What does oppression mean to you? If I
No, we won't know what that is.
You don't, do you have a sense of what it is?
I know what power is.
Okay, well, what's power?
Like you have connections and you have the ability to like control over something, have control over something.
Right, you have connections, you have the ability to have control over something. What else does power mean to you?
Strong.
Strength, okay, good. What else? I see Unadi's Googling it, maybe, are you? Oppression? Yeah. Power is, Eunice, you're not really far off with your definition. I think the sociological definition is the ability for you to get something or do something when other people want something else, right? So the ability to get what you want when other people want something else, right? So again, we had a quiz on Monday, right? And I wanted us to have a quiz. You probably did not want to have a quiz on Monday, but we had one anyway, right? Because I have that power, right? I can get what I want, even though all of you might not have wanted the same thing, right? So that's a good example. But again, it's a very simple thing, right? You have the ability to get something even though other people want something else. Okay. Now oppression's different. What did they say about oppression there, Unadi?
It's like unjust something.
Unjust something?
Yeah. Unjust treatment or control.
Ooh, unjust treatment or control. Okay, that's good. I'm going to add to that a little bit, but it's not bad. But let's see what we have here. All right. So remember this, right? This was the map that Janice drew for Katie and, oh no, just for Katie. Janice and Damien drew this map for Katie so that she would understand kind of how the school worked, right? And there's all of these. I'm going to move my head here for a second. There we go. All of these, there's all these different groups within the school, right? And Janice was nice enough to draw them in the cafeteria where they all sit. And actually, I'm just going to look. Interesting, the plastics are almost right in the middle, right? As are the jocks, which is interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. Would you say the most popular people are kind of towards the center?
Just like they're the center of attention.
Kind of, yeah. They're right in the center of the cafeteria where kind of everyone can see them. And who's kind of pushed off into the corner?
The ones who are at the bottom.
The lower end, right? So the fat girls. Sorry, that's not nice, but that's what it says. The fat girls. The desperate wannabes are there. The band geeks are there. Oh, there's two types. There's asexual band geeks and sexually active band geeks. Interesting, interesting division there. But yeah, everyone is kind of organized sort of with, in terms of location. But anyway, so we had all these different groups, right? And we said that one of the things that I want to point out here, and we'll come back to this a couple times too, is I want to you remember this idea of binary opposites, okay? So when you have something that's binary means two, right? Or bi means two. So when we have binary opposites, we have two things that are opposite. And humans and society often like to think about things in binary oppositions because it's a very convenient way to organize the world, right? Are you a boy or a girl, right? Are you hot or not? Smart or dumb? Up or down? Black or white? Hot or cold, right? Dog or cat, right? We humans often like to, Democrat or Republican, left wing, right wing, right? Society and humans like to organize people into two groups, right? And the two groups are at opposite ends of a spectrum. They're opposing each other, and that's why they're called binary opposites. And so people like to define themselves by the group that they belong to, right? So I'm a man, right? And so I, to some extent, define myself by the things that society says that a man should be, right? Not all of them, but most of them or some of them. But I also define myself by what I am not, right? So I am a man, but at the same time I'm not a woman, right? There are things about being a woman that I am not, right? And so when we define ourselves, when we kind of build our identities, we build it based on who we are, but also on who we're not. Right? Canada's a good example of this too, because what's Canada like? If Canada was a person, how would you describe Canada? If Canada was a single person, what would we be like?
Moody.
Moody?
You don't know when they're gonna cry or when they're gonna. You get it, the weather, right?
Oh, you're thinking of the
You
weather.
know when it's gonna rain or.
Weather-wise, we can be very moody,
Yeah.
right? Very true. What else? What else is Canada like?
It's like the world. Like it has people from everywhere.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's very okay. It's like the world. It's got people from everywhere. That's very true. What else is Canada like? What's your impression of Canada? What's our reputation? What do people believe about us?
My grandparents said there's a lot of people from Hong Kong and Vancouver.
That's very true. There is a lot of people from Hong Kong and Vancouver. I suspect in the next few years there will be more and more, but we'll see. Very true. What else is Canada like? What's our reputation? Are we nice? Are we jerks? We're jerks? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Good.
yeah.
We have a reputation of being pretty nice.
Yeah, I heard that it's nice here. That's why I was going to the U.S. for school, but I switched and I decided to go here.
Ah, okay. Because what's what's the U.S. like? What are,
Racist.
what's that?
Racist.
Racist? What else? What else do we know? What else do we know about the U.S.? They have a lot of gangsters? Right, a lot of violence, a lot of crime, maybe. Okay. What else do we know about the U.S.?
I think most of what I guess because my country is so conservative, I guess like Western countries are like more to like open to like whatever you wear or like your sexuality and gender and like religion and stuff. I think.
Kind of very like liberal, anything goes kind of thing. Do you think Canada and the U.S. are the same that way, or does Indonesia see Canada and the U.S. as the same, or not so much in that way?
Well, here I think it's less like not as racist as the U.S. and
Okay.
not as crazy as the but yeah, maybe I think like what you wear is like more. There are more people here are more open. That's why I'm more happy here and um like your sexuality and gender too. Like people are more open, right?
Right. So we're more accepting of those kind of things.
Compared to Indonesia because it's still very like conservative.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true. My point here is that like with Canadians, we kind of define ourselves by who we are, right? So we like to think we're nice and we're polite and we like hockey and Tim Hortons donuts and sometimes the weather is pretty extreme here, but we're tough and we can handle it. But so we define ourselves that way, but we also define ourselves by who we're not, right? We're not American, right? And to suggest that Canadians are the same as American, you will probably have Canadians telling you, hold on a second there.
It's different.
We are not the same as the US, right? Because we have an idea of the Americans as being kind of loud, being kind of brash. They like their guns.
I think everyone thinks that
There's
way.
there's a whole racist thing going on there. And so, and again, I'm not saying all those things are true. They're kind of stereotypes, which we'll get to in a minute. But we in Canada define ourselves both ways, right? As what we are, Canadian, but also as what we're not, right? So, what is it to be Canadian? Well, we're not that, right? We're not the same as Americans, even though we're not that different, but we're a little bit different, right? If you're going to say, the difference between Canadians and Chinese people, there's a bigger difference than between Canada and the U.S. We're not that different, but still, people will define themselves by their opposites. Okay, so in Mean Girls, you can kind of see some of the ways in which society defines people because some of the social groups can be understood this way, right? So think about the jocks. Are they popular or not popular? Popular. Plastics, popular or not popular?
Definitely.
Definitely popular. Band geeks, popular or not popular?
For being sexually active.
Well, I don't know.
Well,
I think neither of them are that popular.
yeah.
What about yeah, guys or girls, right? The plastics are all girls, right? Jocks are all guys. Attractive or not attractive? Hot or not, right? Are the jocks hot or not? They're hot, right? All these muscular football player guys, they're hot, right? The plastics, hot, right? The desperate wannabes, not so much. Right? So we can very clearly characterize some of these groups according to these binary opposites, okay? Now, in real society, we have kind of the same thing, but the social categories don't have to do with interests, but they more often have to do with race or class or gender or ability status, right? The people with disabilities, religions, nationalities, and those groups have different amounts of power. And when we talk about oppression, this is what we're talking about. So Unadi, your Google definition, of course, was correct. But here in social justice, we're talking about a relationship between groups of people. Okay? So this is a little bit of a different way to use this word, okay? So this is what we'll say for our purposes here in class. This is what we'll say oppression is. And so it's a relationship between two groups, one group that has power and the other group that has less power. Not necessarily no power, but less power. And that power, the way that it works, is through policies and practices and traditions, social norms, definitions, right? The way we define things, the way we explain things, the way we explain how the world works. And all of these things kind of work together in order to benefit one group and disadvantage another group, okay? And so we'll be using these two terms quite a bit going forward. So the dominant group and the minoritized group, okay? So the dominant group has power, right? The dominant group is able to use these policies and proceed. What is a policy? Like rules?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. What else is it? Actually, that's not bad, Dunya. Yeah, so policies are kind of rules or kind of ways that you approach a certain thing, right? So we have a plagiarism policy here, cheating and plagiarism policy at Columbia College. And so it talks about the rules about cheating and plagiarism. And there's kind of an approach, right? So if somebody has cheated, then this is what we're going to do. We're going to follow these steps to deal with it, right? So all policies are kind of like that. It's your approach to something. Sometimes it's rules. Sometimes it's, well, what are we going to do about this, right? If you talk about a country's foreign policy, you're talking about what is that country's approach to other countries in the world, right? Who are your friends? Who are your enemies? Who are your frenemies, right? You got to figure that out. So the dominant group here is able to use all of these to benefit, right? And the minoritized group is not really benefited by all of those things. They kind of lose out. Does that make sense so far? I know this might be a little tricky, but that's okay. So I created a little table for you here. And you can kind of see this is the opposition here between the minoritized and the dominant group. And note that this table can really only be used for North America, right? If we go to China, the dominant group is not white people, right?
Of course.
Of course not, right? The dominant group in China is Chinese people, right? So it depends on kind of where you are, what the groups actually are. So I'm speaking to the West here because that's the society that I understand, or at least sometimes I think I understand it. But again, if you think about your own countries, if you think about where you come from, things may be a little bit different, of course, right? So here in the West, we have kind of an opposition between the dominant group, white people, and we have people of color, right? Non-white people. Again, this is not a perfect, people of color is not a great term because there's so many different types of people in that group that it doesn't kind of represent their experience very well, but we'll go with it here. So yeah, the relationship we have here is racism, right? White people in Western society, they are able to use these policies and practices and traditions and norms and explanations and all that stuff to benefit themselves, right? To the detriment of people of color, right? Who are less advantaged, right? They don't have the same advantages. They don't have the same opportunities. They have less power, okay? And it works the same for all of these different groups, right? Classism. So the owning class, the 1%, the people who have the serious cash, right? Those guys are, and girls, but mostly guys, those guys are able to use society to benefit themselves, right? To the detriment of other people, right? Which is basically the rest of us, right? And people like Bernie Sanders in the United States, he's tweeting every day, almost every day, saying things like, people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, they don't pay any taxes every year because they're able to use tax laws to decrease their tax bill to basically zero. And Bernie is saying, is that fair? Right? Is it fair that I pay less tax or I pay more tax than Jeff Bezos, who is a multi-billionaire? Is that fair? And again, you can have your own feelings on that, and I don't want to get into it right now, but Jeff Bezos is certainly able to use his money and power and influence to generate a situation where he doesn't have to pay any tax, right? And the owning class has been able to do that. I have been unsuccessful. Right? I still have to pay a pretty good chunk of taxes, considering how much money I make. A lot of money goes out the door to taxes. Yeah, at least it's around 25%.
Oh.
At
wow.
least. That's just income tax. So I pay my income tax is around 25%. Most Canadians are, and then there's all the other stuff, right? So PST, GST. If you buy gasoline to put in your
Annoying.
car, a lot of gasoline is actually taxes. Yeah, so we pay a good chunk of tax here in Canada. But again, some people have been able to create a situation where they don't have to pay a lot at all, even though they have a lot of money. Right? Sexism, right? So we'll talk about this a little bit later, this definition of cis men, but for now I'm just going to leave it alone. So men are the dominant group, basically in all societies around the world, right? And they can use society's rules and procedures and social institutions. They can use them to their benefit and to the detriment of mostly women, but also people who are, oh my gosh, it's 9:40, but also people who are not men, right? So people who are trans men, trans women, gender queer people. Again, we'll get to that all later and I'll define them. But men are the dominant group. And again, if you work your way down here, you'll see these are kind of the people who have power, right? People who are straight, right? Heterosexuals. They are the ones in power, right? People who are gay or lesbian or something else, not so much, right? Here in Canada, Christians.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's the main,
Yeah. We have a pretty big chunk of people who are not religious. So about 30% of people in Canada are not really religious at all. But the biggest group is people who are Christian. Now whether they're like super, observant Christians or whether they're kind of
religious
loose.
or non-religious.
Yeah, if they're kind of loosely Christian, there's a difference there. But yeah, most people in Canada are Christian. People are able-bodied, right? People who don't have any physical disabilities or, real mental disabilities or emotional ones. Citizens. Nicholas, what's up? What are you looking at? I know I'm beautiful. Take a picture, it'll last longer.
Oh.
What? Okay. I have no idea. No idea what that was about. Okay, and
Thank you. See you. Bye. Thank you.
anyway, okay, this is all the time. We're out of time here. So we'll leave it there. We'll come back to this tomorrow. We'll talk a little bit more about oppression and power. I have something for you to read that will give us some important definitions and backgrounds in terms of what stereotypes are and prejudice and discrimination and all that stuff. And then we'll be able to move forward, okay? So good work today. That is all. I will see you tomorrow. Have a nice afternoon.
Thank you.
Cheerio. Yes, that's it. Okay. Online people, same thing. Have a nice afternoon, and we'll see you, okay? See you tomorrow.